Hello and welcome back to CWU Live. I'm Michael Walker. Today we've got three political stories for you. The Labour Party has published its new workers' rights bill. The CWU union has been pretty instrumental in getting this into Parliament, so looking forward to discussing that. CWU members have been protesting the cut to the winter fuel payments. This is a story that makes the Labour government look less good than the new workers' rights legislation. And internal to the union, the CWU is currently balloting members on whether to continue with its political fund. This is now a legal requirement that unions have to do this every 10 years. I've got two brilliant guests to discuss all of these topics. Chloe Koffman is political coordinator at the CWU. Thank you so much for joining me today. And down the line, I'm joined by Dawn Butler, MP for Brent East. How are you doing, Dawn?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Not too bad.
You excited about the new legislation that's been published today? Your bread and butter?
The employment rights bill, well, it's a Labour bill, right? It is, and it's putting people first, like working people first, which is something that you would expect from a Labour government. So I'm pleased that we were discussing that bill and putting it forward, and we're going to protect workers and ensure that they have rights from day one, which, if you were saying this to somebody else out that side, they'd think that you would automatically have rights from day one, that you wouldn't have to wait 2 years. So I think it's great. And the end to fire and rehire, what we have to ensure is that we close all the loopholes so that employers don't try and treat employees unfairly through the back door. But I think it's a good day for the first 100 days of a Labour government.
We'll be talking about the details of the bill, what loopholes it may or may not have. First, though, let's take a look at Jonathan Reynolds. He's the business secretary, explaining why Labour are introducing this bill, which, as I say, is something the CWU was fairly instrumental in getting to Parliament.
So our employment bill that we are presenting to Parliament today, the start of the parliamentary process, it is about that greater security, that balance of work with other responsibilities, tilting the balance towards the best employers like the cooperative group here in Berkeley. And specifically, it extends sick pay to a much larger group of workers. It gives them protection against unfair dismissal. It brings into scope things like parental leave and paternity leave for a greater group of workers. Many businesses already do this, so it's a level playing field in that regard. But it's making sure people understand that their rights will increase under this Labour government, and that we have worked with business to make sure what we're doing is fair, proportionate and balanced, and in the interests of everyone across the economy.
So I think there are 28 aspects to this new bill. So we're not going to go through all 28 of them. I'll just read out some of the key features of the package for now. So day one rights, they will guarantee that's protection against unfair dismissal from the first day as an employee. Currently, that kicks in after 2 years. It can be much sooner than it was. On sick pay, there'll be a universal entitlement to sick pay from the first day of illness for employees. So currently, workers only have the right to statutory sick pay from the fourth day. So for 3 days of sick, you don't get paid. On 0 hours contracts, the right to guaranteed hours or a guaranteed hours contract for employees who work regular hours over a defined period. Labour's suggesting this would be 12 weeks, so this will go out for consultation. Workers will be able to continue on 0 hour contracts if they prefer. Now, this could potentially be a loophole because obviously if your employer pressures you to say, oh, I'd prefer a 0 hours contract, then that could be difficult, but we'll be talking about that as well. And on flexible working, that will become the default where possible. Now, obviously, what where possible means will be quite significant. Chloe, can I get your initial thoughts on this legislation? What do you think are sort of the key bits of it that people need to know?
Sure, yeah. This is a hugely significant piece of legislation, not only for our members at the CWU, but also for workers all across the country. As you mentioned, the CWU has been campaigning for this for over 8 years, and this bill really marks the first step towards these policies that are going to really transform the workplace and bring about a bit of balance actually back to on the employee side rather than the employer side. And I think sometimes you can kind of judge the significance of these things by some of the reaction from big business, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And some people in the business community and some CEOs have sort of come out against this today. And I think that's because for so long people have been able to treat workers badly and offer jobs that are insecure, low paid, and now they're being challenged on it. In terms of the most sort of significant parts of the bill and what people need to know about it, the first thing I would say is the repeal of anti-trade union laws. That's deeply significant for all trade unions, not just the CWU. So the first thing you'll see there is the repeal of the 2016 Trade Union Act. So this is a very restrictive act that was introduced under the Cameron government. It introduced things like requiring the 50% industrial action ballot threshold, the 40% support threshold, the 2-week notice period for industrial action, the mandatory expiration date, so you have to reballot as well when you're in a dispute with an employer. Picket line supervision, all of these different things that are designed to make life harder for trade unions, they will be gone. We've got the minimum service levels. We've already seen the Labour government take action on that. So the conscription laws that would see workers be sacked when they want to go on strike, those are gone. And also trade unions will finally be allowed to introduce electronic balloting, which is something that our members will understand how important it is for a modern trade union to be able to do that. The second element of the bill that I would say is the key thing to note is the introduction of new individual rights in the workplace, some of which you were just mentioning. So you mentioned the day one rights, so that's on sick pay, unfair dismissal and parental leave. So instead of having to wait for up to 2 years, you will now be entitled to those on day one of employment. As you mentioned as well, we've got banning most 0 hours contracts, although we're definitely going to be in the consultation period on that one, banning fire and rehire, strengthening protections for workers during redundancy, strengthening protections for pregnant workers, getting rid of the 2-tier code, modernising blacklisting laws. I mean, there's so many of these policies, we can't actually go through all of them today, but it is going to be hugely significant for the CWU, not only in our core industries, so in Royal Mail and telecoms, but also in the new industries that we are trying to organise in. So the tech sector, financial sector, and anywhere else that we're going to be looking to organise in, this creates a really good platform for us to go forward in.
Because a lot of as far as I understand it, a lot of the individual rights in the workplace will be things, so the statutory element of this is often sort of the bare minimum, isn't it? So it will be the case that CWU members in certain industries, Royal Mail, for example, they probably do already have more rights than your standard worker because the union has come to an agreement with the employer. Is that correct? Or
in some areas, yes. So our members in Royal Mail might be less affected, for example, by things like 0 hours contracts, as you mentioned. But those protections for day one of employment is really, really important. Mm-hmm. If you look at something like parental leave, for example, having to wait months and even years when you've been with your employer to access something like that is a huge burden on a worker's life. And it's just something that, as Dawn mentioned before, this is quite basic, especially across some of the other comparable European countries. So I think it really depends. And obviously all trade unions will have kind of a different approach to the bill because there are some things that affect it. Other industries like the education sector, for example, the school support staff negotiating body or collective bargaining in the fire and rescue service. But the main overall takeaway from the package is about rebalancing the workplace so that employers don't hold all the power, they don't hold all the flexibility, they don't control every aspect of workers' lives. And that's whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector or wherever you work, if you're a contract worker or you've worked at Royal Mail for 30 years, for example. So I do think it is a comprehensive package to start off with.
And I mean, even if there are certain features of it which CWU members in the Royal Mail, for example, are already protected by, what this could do is stop new businesses undercutting Royal Mail by treating their workers terribly, right? Exactly. So there could be this sort of indirect benefit for even the ones where members in this union are already protected. Let's go to some of the opposition to this. You sort of mentioned that there has already been some opposition to this bill. The right-wing papers aren't happy with it. So on the Daily Mail front page, they warn that business is furious at Labour's revolution for workers. Their story is based on a statement from the Federation of Small Businesses. So they said this legislation is rushed job, clumsy, chaotic and poorly planned, dropping 28 new measures onto small business employers all at once leaves them scrambling to make sense of it all. Plans to give day one unfair dismissal rights to new employees will add to the risks associated with hiring people. That increased risk will inevitably deter small employers from taking on new people for fear of facing an employment tribunal simply because a new recruit turns out to be unsuited to the role. So the Small Business Association, or the Federation of Small Businesses, is concerned. Jonathan Reynolds, so the business secretary, was asked about opposition from business on Sky this morning.
What do you say to those businesses who say that it's going to negatively impact recruitment within their business?
Well, look, I can absolutely reassure them about that because we've worked so closely with business and with unions as part of this process. So, for instance, at the minute, there are 9 million British workers who are not protected against unfair dismissal because they haven't worked for their present employer for more than 2 years. We are going to change that. They will have that right on day one. But we will also put into place probationary periods by which the process of fair dismissal is a lighter touch than it is for the rest of your employment. So there'll be a recognition that sometimes it doesn't work out. There's an easier process needed at the start of that employment contract. So you'll get more rights, but we're very sensitive, particularly for smaller businesses, of the need to recruit with confidence. We've listened, we've adapted the plans accordingly as part of that. So I can reassure people this is fair, balanced, does increase people's rights, but reassures them on that hiring point in particular.
So obviously it's reasonable for the government to be sort of consulting with business and trade unions. They don't want to sort of significantly damage business interests, I would presume. My question for you, though, Dawn, is there a danger that sort of in this consultation period, while this is going through Parliament, that business lobbyists sort of manage to get the ear of Keir Starmer and sort of the Labour front bench and water down this bill? Is that something that sort of viewers should be worried about?
Well, I mean, I think, Michael, first of all, if there's a business and they are implementing the 28 new employee reforms, then they're not a very good business to begin with, because some of those reforms are pretty basic. So you can understand employers having to implement one or two that they haven't considered before, they haven't implemented before. But if there's any employers that have to implement all 28, then they're not a very good employer to begin with. I think if we remember back to, and I'm old enough to remember when the minimum wage was first coming in, and you had the Conservatives saying this will destroy businesses, that we will lose 2 million jobs out of the economy. It was the worst thing ever. And the minimum wage came in and it resulted in an additional 2 million jobs. So there's always that resistance, if you like, to implementing workers' rights from some quarters. So yes, I think obviously there needs to be a balance, and there has been a balance and intense discussions with the business community, but also with workers, the wealth creators of our country. And I think sometimes people forget that, the wealth creators should be paid fairly, should have fair rights conditions, should be able to afford to live well. And some people are not. Some people, we had with the cost of living crisis, there's some people living far away from where they work and having to sleep in their cars. Who would have thought, like the 6th richest country in the world, we have situations like that? So I don't think that there will be too much movement because there's been so much work beforehand in putting this bit of legislation together.
And Chloe, we've talked there, or sort of shown there, some opposition from business saying this is too strong. Mm-hmm. There has been opposition from some trade unionists saying it's too weak. So Sharon Graham, who's General Secretary at Unite, I think she sort of welcomed the bill in general, but she also said, in quite dramatic fashion, it's got more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese. Do you agree with her, or do you have a slightly different perspective?
I'm not sure I would quite put it like that, but But I think Sharon does make a fair point that the bill doesn't necessarily go far enough on a few certain points. So take the position on sexual collective bargaining, for example. So part of the bill is promising a fair pay agreement, or FPA, in the care sector. So basically an FPA is an agreement that's at the sector level that covers every employer and every employee in that sector and sets a minimum set of pay terms and conditions. And all employers have to comply with that. It's very common across Europe, and we used to obviously have it in this country up until a few decades ago. Obviously, we welcome that. The care sector obviously needs it, but we want to see it go further. We want to see sectoral collective bargaining introduced across sectors of the economy, particularly, for example, in the parcel courier sector, where, as we mentioned before, Royal Mail is being consistently undercut by companies like Amazon and Every, who pay their workers peanuts and put them on insecure contracts, sometimes falsely sort of self-employ them, and they're basically subject to no regulation. So we do want them to go further on that. There's another Labour policy that hasn't made it into the bill, which is the introduction of a single status of worker. So this is really, really important on the subject of getting rid of bogus self-employment, particularly in the gig economy. You know, we're seeing sort of 2-3-tier workforces in the same sector or even in the same employer. And until we equalise and get a single status of worker, so you just have employee and self-employed, that problem is not going to be resolved. So, you know, is everything in the bill that we would, is every policy in there? You know, no, clearly not. But we kind of see this as a springboard from which we can start introducing these much needed policies and then continue to build upon them as part of the overall package of the New Deal for workers.
So the sectoral bargaining thing is really interesting, isn't it? So at the moment, sort of care workers would have to, in each individual business, go on strike and form some kind of agreement with their employer. And this would now mean that, I mean, if they were to go on strike or the union was to go into negotiations, there'd be terms and conditions set for the entire industry, which stops people undercutting each other. And that could be, as you say, sort of revolutionary for the delivery industry. Not so much for Royal Mail workers, but for their competitors.
Yes. So the point, I guess, is not that, you know, Royal Mail in the industry has what you might describe as the gold standard of pay terms and conditions, especially compared to some of these other courier companies. But the problem is our members' terms and conditions are under threat from these other companies because there is no minimum floor. And essentially, if employers hold all the cards when it comes to low pay, when it comes to flexibility, we are never going to be able to get sector-wide union membership. We're never going to be able to get a strong sector in the same way. So it's really, really important that the Labour government realises this. I know a lot of business leaders have come out against it. But you also look at, again, we look to other countries in Europe. Lots of them have huge sector-wide agreements that work really well. And I don't see why we can't learn from those countries and introduce it here.
Dawn, this will be debated in Parliament over the next weeks and months. I'm not sure what the schedule is for when they actually want to get this written into law. Will you be having have you got any priorities that you're going to be lobbying for or questions you might be asking about this?
I think I'm going to have a chat with Chloe because she's so across the bill. With information, I think I'm going to give her a call.
That's how I feel.
But yeah, I mean, I think Chloe's right. It is a springboard. What I will be looking at in a bit more detail is the possible loopholes and just seeing if there are any sort of glaring, obvious ones that we can plug now. And I think I'd also like to, I mean, there's parts in the bill around fines and how to hold employers to account. I think all of that is really good stuff. I mean, everything isn't in the bill, but it is a step in the right direction. Even the repealing of the anti-trade union laws, all of that stuff, we've been fighting for so long to have that happen. I'm pleased that it's happened in the first 100 days. I think it's a solid move from the party, from the Labour government.
Yeah, the Labour government now, not just the Labour Party.
I know.
Let's move on to a story. Sorry about this, Dawn. We're going to move on to a story which paints your party and the government in a slightly worse light. So this is cuts to the winter fuel payment. On Monday, CWU retired members, along with other trade unionists, protested against cuts to the winter fuel payment. We can see some footage from that demonstration.
retired members are still, many of them are still trade union members, and a lot of them are going to suffer. And to tell you the truth, if we don't show our disgust for what this Labour Party's doing now, then they'll go for the other things like the free bus passes, the prescriptions. So we have to stand up and protect what we've already got and try and improve on it, indeed.
There are some rich pensioners, 1.1 million of them have a pension pot of £1 million, but that's not the majority of the people that we have in our membership, and it's not the majority of people that workers will be paying into their pension.
Cutting the winter fuel allowance is going to push 2.5 million more pensioners into fuel poverty. Like we already know that energy debt levels have been rising astronomically over the past few years because of the cost of living crisis. Ofgem have just set the winter fuel cap at £1,717, which is on average for the average family a rise of £200. So energy debt levels are only going to increase, and this policy is going to be part of that for a lot of people.
As a carer to two elderly parents, and here really to represent all of the the elderly and the poorest of society who can't be here because of disabilities.
As soon as you start breaking the principle of universality, it's exactly the question that's been asked. Where do they go next? What's the next benefit?
What we want is a debate on the right to live, because there are old age pensioners this Christmas who are going to die. So as far as the CW are concerned, we're fully behind this campaign.
Younger members obviously, goes without saying, will be facing retirement in the longer term, and it's very likely that by the time they retire, if things go the way they're going, that the state pension will be a lot less than it is pro rata now, and they'll be facing an even bigger problem.
At the end of the day, we feel badly let down by this particular government on the basis of they were saying we want change, but I think that we've been a little bit shortchanged over that.
So, Chloe, I know this is an issue which has caused a lot of anger and upset within the CWU. Can you talk about sort of the CWU's approach to this move by the Labour Party?
Yeah, so we've opposed this from the day it was announced. Some of our members might be aware that we actually used one of our Labour Party conference motions this year to talk about this alongside another trade union, Unite. So we called for a reversal to the cuts for the winter fuel allowance, and also a change in approach and how they're approaching the economy and spending. And you know, despite a lot of opposition from the leadership of the party and the top table of the Labour Party, we're really glad that the other trade unions and the delegates actually backed us on this, and we did win that vote, and the motion passed. And I think it sent a really important message to the Labour Party about this issue and how important it is to our members. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to keep on pushing the Labour Party as much as we can on this issue. You know, speaking frankly, there's no justification for doing this. You know, there's billions and billions of undertaxed and untaxed wealth in this country. There's absolutely no reason why pensioners should be paying for gaps in public spending. We think this choice is wrong. We think it's the wrong way to start off a Labour government. And we'll continue to push this issue with the party. And, you know, Dave Ward, our General Secretary, has been very public with this, and he'll continue to do that until we see a change in approach from Labour.
And I suppose should people be a bit disappointed? Because I know CW put forward that motion. CW are clearly trying hard on this, right? Mm-hmm. They put forward that motion at the Labour Party. It passed, you know, to say let's reverse the cut to the winter fuel payment. Does this show the limit of the influence of the trade unions in the Labour Party?
No, I don't think it shows the limit at all, because at the end of the day, we're either here and in the tent applying that pressure, or we're not. That is really the choice. So we just cannot let big business or, you know, anyone else who's kind of pushing for a return back to austerity politics to be the only voices in the Labour Party. That cannot happen. And we do have the ability to exert influence over the Labour Party. You know, it doesn't mean we're always going to agree on every single policy that they put out or the way they approach the economy all the time. But at the end of the day, we have to be there to influence it and to, you know, represent the interests of our members, and that includes our retired members.
Dawn, lots of people, I mean, in the CWU, but also just in the country, has been very unpopular, I have to say, this plan to sort of means test the winter fuel payment. What are your thoughts about this as a Labour MP?
So I don't actually disagree with anything that Chloe said. I mean, in principle, I'm not opposed to wealthy pensioners not getting a winter fuel allowance. You know, there's always a campaign every year where those pensioners who are well off, make a song and dance about giving it to charity. So I'm not opposed to the very wealthiest of pensioners not getting it. I think the problem at the moment within some within the Labour Party is that if you disagree, it's seen as being disloyal. And I think that's problematic, especially when it comes to areas like this. So I think it's important to protest. I think the CWU's campaign is very important. And I feel that making this announcement first, I mean, there was a huge gasp when the announcement was made, and that was me. I was like, oh my goodness. So, we didn't see it coming. Since the announcement's been made and since the protest, I mean, that's how we get things done, and it's absolutely right. And I think the unions haven't lost influence at all, as you can see from the employment bill we were talking about earlier. And we're not always going to disagree, and we have to make sure we make the best decisions. And you make the best decisions when you're questioned about what you're doing and the direction of travel. So I think that's healthy. But the government has talked about, protecting the triple lock, which will see an extra £900 this year on pensions, the warm homes plans, and the fact that there's going to be a campaign because nearly 1 million pensioners are not getting benefits that they're entitled to. So in this process, there is a concerted effort to make sure that pensioners get more money in their pockets, especially the pensioners that need it. But we do have to be really mindful. I know the stress and the worry. I mean, in Brent, I've had so many pensioners. The worry alone is a lot. And we do have to get that message out there to kind of alleviate those worries and those fears.
And I think there was an opposition day motion on this, wasn't there, where the Tories put forward a motion to say we oppose means testing this. I mean, which to me seems somewhat insincere for the Tories to be saying we're very much opposed to austerity. But I think you abstained on that. Was that a sort of conscious decision, or was that just you couldn't be in Parliament that day? What was going on?
No comment, Michael.
No comment. Okay. Chloe, on this, so there's two issues, aren't there? There's sort of, should it be means tested? Mm-hmm. And then is the way it's being means tested wrong? Mm-hmm. So some people would say, actually, it is fine to not give this to millionaire pensioners, but the way this is being done, there are too many people who are neither millionaires nor able to get pension credit. There's lots of people sort of caught in the middle, basically. Yeah. Would you, I mean, I don't want you to make up CWU policy on the hoof, mm-hmm. but I suppose what would be your perspective if the Labour Party said, actually, yeah, we're still going to means test it, but we're going to do it in a more progressive way, whereby you get your winter fuel payment so long as you're not a millionaire. I think the Conservatives put out a video opposing this. Yes. And it turned out that talking to these pensioners saying how difficult their winter was going to be, and it turned out, and I know there are lots of pensioners for whom this winter will be difficult because of this, mm-hmm. but they'd chosen a gentleman who was wearing like a £5,000 Rolex. Yeah. So I suppose that's because they're Tory supporters. So they've found some fairly wealthy pensioners to talk to. Mm-hmm. Are you opposed to the principle of means testing, sort of as a principle, or just the way that the Labour Party have done this?
I mean, like you said, I can't make up CWU policy on the hoof, but I personally am opposed to the means testing, and I'll tell you why. I think I understand the argument about wealthy pensioners being in receipt of this, but we heard John McDonnell just in that short clip there talk about universalism. And the principle of universalism, it really underpins our society. So we have the NHS, for example, and yes, it's true, millionaires can use the NHS. But the reason we have it there is so that no one falls through the net. So every person who needs it can access it. And I think the same is true with the winter fuel payment. So currently, everyone who needs that winter fuel payment, all of those pensioners who are not in receipt of pension credit, and there are a lot of them, they receive that payment and no one falls through the net. By introducing this policy, and the way that they've introduced it as well, which is part of the problem, they introduced it and gave pensioners not a lot of time to apply for pension credit, and now people are going to fall through the net. And this is what's so...
Doing it just before the winter was just bizarre.
It is bizarre, but it's on purpose, and I hate to say this, but it is true, because if everyone who is eligible for pension credit claimed it, the entire saving of this policy, as I'm sure you know, Michael, would be wiped out. So they are banking on people who actually do need this policy not receiving it. And I think this doesn't stem from the Labour Party, hating pensioners or deciding that they're not worthy of extra support during the winter. What it stems from is the wrong ideological approach to our economy and focusing on, balancing the books of this 22 billion black hole off the backs of pensioners and working people, rather than the sort of masses of untaxed wealth that we have in this country, because I think there are some people in the Labour Party who are a bit scared to spook some of those wealthy people. And I think that approach is fundamentally wrong. It's not going to deliver the change that we need from the Labour government, and it is going to give a little bit of ground to Reform and the Tory party in the next few years, unless they change things up.
If for purely electoral reasons, going after pensioners as your first thing to do is very, very odd as a sort of political decision. Let's go to some comments from you guys. So, Kiedis, I am curious if this new deal with workers will make Royal Mail deal with current casual workers now or later. I'm also hoping that temporary contract workers are safe. Deal with... I'm not sure I totally understand that question. Does that make sense to you?
I think I get the gist of what the commenter is saying. One thing that it's worth saying that was part of Labour's package, which was actually the subject of a High Court ruling last year, was making sure that agency workers aren't used and exploited during industrial action to cover strikes, which is something that had pretty disastrous consequences on the railway, and we know has been an issue in our sectors as well. But like I mentioned before, all of these introductions of individual rights in the workplace, again, protection from unfair dismissal is a big one. Even if you are on a temporary contract, that is a really good starting point to start levelling the playing field and making the current Royal Mail management think differently about the way they're approaching the recruitment crisis.
Yeah, it should be, if I'm ever reading a question and I don't quite understand it, don't take it personally, because it's probably not how you wrote it. It's me not having quite enough knowledge about the internal workings of the CWU and the various sort of disputes going on. So that's why I'm sort of throwing it. Duncan Davis, unfair dismissal rights from day one are very important. The plan to water down by defining an initial period of employment with easier dismissal is worrying. So the background here, so at the moment you don't have any rights against unfair dismissal for the first 2 years.
Yes.
From Labour, or the Labour Party now is saying you'll have some rights from day one, but in the first 9 months it's still going to be easier to fire you than it would after that first 9 months. And that's sort of their compromise with business, isn't it? Should that be a concern, or is that sort of sensible?
So, again, without getting really bogged down in the detail of how this is going to work, so just to be clear, this is not decided yet. This is going up for a period of consultation. The length of any statutory probation periods that are introduced is still up for consultation, and obviously we will be in that conversation arguing for the absolute best deal for all workers as well as our members. Just specifically on the point of unfair dismissal, all workers will have the right of protection against unfair dismissal from day one. What I believe the intention is, and obviously subject to consultation, is to create a circumstance where employers still need to use an assessment under fair dismissal, so capability or conduct, for example, but the steps within a probationary period may be shorter than they were outside of that probationary period. Now, that's sort of a wordy answer, right? And there's still a lot of things that need to be decided. And enforcement, for example, implementation enforcement is really the key here. The devil is in the detail with employment law. So we're going to be there making sure that big businesses aren't trying to get these huge, long probation periods, for example. Or, creating a new set of fair dismissals that's actually just the same as the unfair dismissal. But I want to emphasise that the core policy of having protection against unfair dismissal from day one is still in there.
Dawn, I've got a question which is directed at you, but I'm wondering if you're going to throw it to Chloe, who's clearly the expert of the three of us on the details in this legislation. But just in case you do know that, can you ask Dawn if there will be statutory time off in the new bill for equality reps? I'm not sure if you've read the small print enough to know the answer to that.
I don't. I think there is a part of the bill that has some statutory time off for trade union reps. But over to you, Chloe.
I can answer that one. So what the bill is introducing is statutory rights for equality reps, which they didn't have before. And part of that, one would assume, is also time off in order to properly represent your members and deal with any things that you might need to deal with in that role. Again, it sounds like a non-answer, but there's a long period of consultation here, and we won't get to the bottom of how all of these policies actually come to fruition probably until the bill gets royal assent, which I think will be around summer next year.
Brilliant. We'll come back to some of these issues when we're talking about our next theme, which is internal to the union. The CWU is currently balloting members on whether to continue with its political fund. Chloe, you're explaining everything today. I'm going back to you. Can you explain what the political fund is?
Sure. So basically, a political fund is a separate fund that a trade union has. Members can choose to opt into paying this fund. You don't have to pay into it. And if you do pay into it, then you decide you don't want to, you can opt out of it. And basically, all of the money that is collected through that fund, it's a very small levy of a couple of pence a week, is the money that trade unions can spend on what is defined in the law as political objects. So that basically means anything from, affiliating to political parties, supporting politicians that you might want to support, any sort of political campaigning, so anything really within the world of politics. So this is something, for context, that all major trade unions have, even if they aren't affiliated to the Labour Party, because this is really what we would describe as an anti-trade union restriction, because we're not allowed to just, spend our money and campaign how we choose. We have to do it sort of within these boundaries. But even if you weren't affiliated to the Labour Party, you still have to have this political fund in order to, be able to campaign in Westminster, for example.
And the reason, so to be clear, the reason this vote is happening, so this is a sort of referendum, a ballot that's going out to all the union members. And it's the first time this has happened. Is that correct?
No, so it happens every 10 years.
But is this not the first time since the legislation was introduced? Or no, was this legislation a while ago?
No, so we did have some members who've been around for a while will remember we had one in 2014, and we overwhelmingly obviously opted to stay into the political fund. What has actually happened with this new Labour government is they've actually committed to getting rid of these ballots because they're obviously unnecessary, and we don't ballot our members on other parts of the union every 10 years. Should we carry on being a trade union and that sort of things? But unfortunately, they haven't quite repealed the legislation in time for us to meet that 10-year requirement. So we are having to do this again, but those ballots will be abolished in the future.
Yeah. And is this still where they're not allowed to do it online? So does this have to be by post?
This is all via post, yeah.
It's not very good for the environment, is it? All these necessary ballots that have to be by post, and you have to. Although I suppose it is quite good for the Royal Mail.
Yeah, it can be.
Looking on the upside.
Members, yeah.
And is this? I suppose some people might think, is this just a Labour Party subsidy? When they put money into the political fund, is it basically just? Every month I've got to pay some money to the Labour Party. I might like some of their policies. I might not like some of their policies. What's the deal there?
So not at all, no. So we pay a proportion of our political fund to affiliate, so our affiliation fees basically to the Labour Party. And some members will remember actually in 2021 we had a special conference, and we decided at that conference to no longer make wholesale donations to the Labour Party outside of our affiliation fees or outside of donations to politicians who share our trade union values. So we haven't done that since 2021, and we also didn't make any wholesale donations to the party during this last general election. But we did, obviously support MPs like Dawn, like many other MPs who, share our values there. But one major way that we use the political fund is actually campaigning outside of the Labour Party. So whether or not that's sort of taking industrial campaigns to both Westminster, but also to Holyrood, to the Senedd, on a local, regional, national level, or working with organisations like Fans Supporting Food Banks, for example, and other political organisations, even sometimes think tanks, that sort of thing, that can sometimes fall into the political fund. And, I would say the CW has been pretty successful at building a very wide-ranging political strategy. We're not just all about Labour. We know that politics needs to be built from the grassroots up, and our political fund is absolutely essential to making sure we're part of the wider Labour movement as well as just Labour.
And if you didn't have a political fund, you basically wouldn't be able to do politics.
No.
You'd only be able to talk about terms and conditions.
Exactly, yeah. And obviously, politics and the industrial are totally intertwined. We can only affect so much in the workplace before we start to look at the laws and the policies that govern both the workplace and our community. So it's super, super important that everyone votes yes in the ballot.
Dawn, I know you were a trade union official for a decade before becoming an MP, weren't you? What's your take on the political fund, or not necessarily just for the CWU, but for trade unions in general?
I mean, I think it's vital. Because otherwise, where would you get that strength of feelings from the trade unions? And remember, that's like connecting to the hundreds of thousands of members that trade unions have. So they can do surveys, they can understand the strength of feeling, and then they can feed back. And I think, CW have done amazing things for their political fund and how it's administered as well. And for some people that say, lobbying is important, and clean lobbying, and any trade union money that comes into the Labour Party is the cleanest money in politics. We know where it comes from. It comes from individual members. It's not like, I know there's like issues aside, but it doesn't come like from one person or like the Tory party, where that money, the PPE lanes, for instance, has gone full circle, right? Because they know they'll get that money back into their politics. So trade union money is the cleanest money in politics. And I think the political fund's important. I think having more trade unionists as members of parliament is vital, because that's where you will get the resistance from in some of these policies where you say, well, actually, that doesn't quite fit with our trade union values. And so, yes, please, everybody vote yes for the political fund.
You mentioned there that sort of these political funds can help unions to get members into Parliament, and that includes the CWU. Lee Barron was a Midlands Regional Secretary for the CWU, then TUC General Secretary for the Midlands, and he's just been elected as the Labour MP for Corby and East Northamptonshire. He gave his maiden speech in the Commons today.
I've spent my adult life representing working people. From the start, when I took on an apprenticeship in the Royal Mail, and I joined my union, the Communication Workers Union. A lot of people talk about their schooling, their university, their training. Well, the CWU was my schooling, was my university, was my training, and without a shadow of a doubt, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. And the journey here has been somewhat interesting, to say the least. It started in the back of a taxi with me and Francis O'Grady talking about the importance of working class people entering our politics, because we was on our way to the funeral of Jack Dromey, a dear friend to this place, to this party, and to our movement. And I want to place on record my thanks to the TUC for what they did for me in supporting me.
Chloe, I wanted to know if there are any CWU members out there who feel like they might want to get into Parliament at some point, or maybe go into politics in other, there are many different ways to get involved in politics, aren't they? How would they go about that?
Well, I definitely agree with Dawn that we need more trade unionists, and particularly more CWU members to get involved in politics, and that could be at any level. So it could be, being a councillor, it could be sort of at the local level, or, even running to be an MP, as we've seen in the last general election. I definitely recommend getting involved at your branch level. So maybe even reaching out to your local CLP to see if there's a Chulo rep, see if you can represent the CWU there. The CWU also has opportunities for political education and political engagement programs. So we've got our CWU candidates program as well, where we offer political education to people who want to run for elected office. And so keep an eye out for all of these things going forward. But of course, this is only made essential by our political fund. So if you do want to get involved in politics, you've got to make sure you return that vote so we can keep on putting trade unionists into Parliament.
How many MPs are there that are sort of, in one way or another, are affiliated to the CWU? How does it work?
There's quite a few who are CW members, but just in terms of this year's intake, so we had obviously Lee, who used to be our regional secretary in the Midlands. We had Chris Webb in Blackpool South, who's a member of ours who got elected, and some of our members will also know Tahir Ali in Birmingham, who used to be a postie and was also elected. And we also saw Kate Osborne, who used to be Royal Mail, return to Parliament as well. So we got there's a few of us in there, and there's a few others who are CW members, but maybe come from different sort of workplace backgrounds. But yeah, we're sort of getting larger as a group, which is always good.
Dawn, do you remember your maiden speech? What did you say?
Yes, my maiden speech, it was Brent South then. I've done Brent South, Brent Central, now I'm Brent East. My maiden speech, I remember talking about how wonderful my constituency is and how somebody ran up towards me and pushed me out the way so they can get to Paul Boateng, who was the MP beforehand. Yeah, something like that. And I spoke, and actually, I was the first person to ever speak patois in the House of Commons.
What did you say?
Oh, I can't remember. Now you're testing. Now
we're going to have to look up the video of your first speech in Parliament.
Yeah.
I think we should bring this to a close. Let's get final thoughts from both of you. Sort of final thoughts on the political fund, on the CW and Labour, how you're feeling about the Labour government so far.
Well, I mean, I think I'll leave it to the members to give their verdict on the first 100 days. But obviously, it's super clear that the introduction of the Employment Rights Bill is the start of a new change for working people in this country. And, it's only down to the members who have campaigned for this for, years, 8 years. 2016, we put that motion into the TUC, and it's just coming about now. And obviously, we're looking at a long journey to actually getting it into law. But it's all, all down to the members. On the political fund ballot, it closes on October the 15th. Please return your ballot as soon as possible and vote yes.
Dawn, final thoughts from you today?
My final thoughts are in regards to the political fund ballot and making sure that it was a paper ballot was the Tories' way of trying to stop people from voting. And I think we really need to be alert to the fact that, some of the things that the Tory party the Tory government did was to stop you voting, whether it's, bringing in voter ID, it was always to stop you voting. So people showed that they can bring ID and vote. And so it is important to vote for the political fund. I think the Employment Rights Bill is a good step for a Labour government. I wish we'd done that first and not, the winter fuel allowance. I think that's kind of sullied the 100 days of a Labour government, whereas we can be a really good Labour government that can make the country work better and fairer. It is possible. All we need is a different mindset. And so, yes, watch this space.
Dawn Butler, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Chloe Koffman, it's been great having you on. So much knowledge about this legislation. I'm sure we'll be talking about it again soon.
Can you send me Chloe's number, please? Chloe,
let's make sure. To be honest, we should get every Labour MP should have your number so that you can give them a full briefing on this piece of legislation, because there's a lot of trust built up in you now.
Yeah.
So thank you both for joining us. Thank you guys for watching and for your questions. We'll be back next week. If there's a question you'd like answered, you can also send us an email at info@cwu.org. This show is about you. We really do want to know what you think, and also what suggestions you might have for future shows. Who would you like us to get in for an interview, and what topics would you like us to address? For now, we'll see you next week. Until then, stick with the union.